Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. In this video, we are going to be looking at and assessing LANDR's automated mastering program. LANDR has certainly been in the hotspot of controversy ever since they came out with automated mastering. Ideologically, people have had issue with automated mastering, and then there is, of course, the question of quality. Is automated mastering even actually good? So we're going to be looking at some of those things, although I do want to put the ideological thing aside a little bit, except to say that I don't believe that automated mastering is really intended to replace actual mastering engineers, which has been one of the controversies. I think that it is really more intended to be a tool used by people who would not necessarily be going to really good actual human being mastering engineers to begin with, which then brings us to the subject of what is good. And I think good becomes a subjective idea because good could be compared on the rubric of what a top-tier great mastering engineer would do with a mix. So if you go to somebody who really is an absolute heavy hitter and kills it on the mastering front, that creates the best version of the mix that it can possibly be. And I think that when you take an automated any automated program, and you compare it to a real heavy hitter mastering engineer, I think it's generally going to fall short because there are simply things that an algorithm cannot figure out. There are subjective decisions, musical decisions, that are not based on tone curve or dynamics and things like that are based more on feel and about musicality, and algorithms just simply haven't gotten to the point, and probably never will get to the point, of being able to do those intrinsically human things. So what is a rubric for something being good? Well, in my opinion, good is going to be defined by whether or not this automated program does better than what I simply do by taking my mix, which I'm happy with, and shoving it through a limiter, right? The basic idea is, can it improve on what I've already done myself? And so we're going to be examining that. So with that little rant over, let's take a listen to this mix that I just did. I did it a couple of days ago. I've walked away from it, so I'm going to hear it with fresh ears.
To follow your road and you see it is a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, they got me big. I'm stuck under your collie grill. I'm on fire. I try to beg, but you won't let up, and I can't find it no more.
So, okay, I think that my mix is okay. I think that in my own frame of reference, there are a couple of things that I would want to change now that I'm hearing it fresh. The first being is that I feel like the balancing of the upper mids and top is not quite right. It feels a little bit pinched in the upper mids, somewhere around the like 3-4K range, something going on there that I don't totally love. Maybe the intersection of the vocal and the snare is not quite on. And then I think that the top end is maybe a little underrepresented relative to that upper mid. There's also a few moments where I feel like the record gets a little congested, and I also think that it just needs a little bit more support in the lows. So overall, if I were to grade my mix, I would give it like a B. I'm not mad at it. I think I could send it to mastering this way, but there are certainly a few things that I would want to change. So now what we're going to do is we're going to listen to my mix just stuffed through FabFilter. I think FabFilter is one of the most transparent limiters out there. And then we're going to compare that to LANDR's automated mastering program here, just in the absolute core default position. Now, it's really important to recognize that part of this is going to be about where we take it from here, and then also kind of discussing the philosophy of whether or not it's truly automated when we start also getting parameters that we can tweak, right? Because these are all very subjective things. But let's just start with what everything is doing by default. So this is just my mix, stuffed face first through a limiter.
To follow your road and you see it is a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, they got me big. I'm stuck under your collie grill. I'm on fire. I try to beg, but you won't let up, and I can't find it no more.
So a couple interesting things happen, right? There's a shift in the dynamics. The snare and the kick get pushed back a little bit, which is pretty typical for stuffing something through a limiter. And then the vocal ends up sort of by comparison, coming forward. So the congestive quality that shows up, while it's still there a little bit, does seem to ease off because now the vocal is more forward, makes it easier to catch that, and it's a little bit less masked maybe. But that pinch that's happening in the upper mid, which is largely driven by the vocal, it becomes a little bit exacerbated. So I think that we've gained a few things, we've lost a few things, but overall we haven't changed all that much, except for the relative positioning of the vocal to the snare. That's the biggest difference that we have here. So now let's take a listen to what we did with LANDR here.
To follow your road and you see it is a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, think I've been bit. I'm stuck under your collie grip. I'm on fire. I try to beg, but you won't let up.
So a lot of things have changed, actually. There's a lot of interesting things that are going on. The snare feels like, it feels like the pinch has been eased off a little bit, and also a sort of like nasally upper mid kind of quality, like the 1.5 to 2.5K also kind of came down a little bit. So it smooths out the upper mid while retaining the presence. In that process, I do think that some of the snare has thinned out a little bit. We're not really getting quite as much emphasis from the snare. I do think it's interesting that the deep subs have actually improved, that LANDR kind of knew, like, oh, the stuff that's happening at like 60 hertz needs to fill out a little bit, even though there's a decent presence of bass and kick. And the top end feels like it has corrected in terms of proportion of top end. I will say this, and this is critical of LANDR, but also critical of my experience with digital EQs in general. Where the software EQs tend to suffer and struggle the most is the extreme top end, where we have our hi-hats and things like that. I don't love the quality of the top end, but I think that the proportion is correct. Mind you, I don't think that I would get much better using any kind of software. This would be one of those things where there's really nothing that beats porting out to an actual, like, real deal Pultec or something like that, or a pair in this case, or, you know, an Avalon 2055 or something like that, where just the top end is really, really breathtaking. So proportion I like, quality, it's about tied with anything else digital in my mind. But generally speaking, I think that it's fairly good. Now, where I struggle is that I feel like the emphasis has tilted more toward the vocal than I would subjectively want to go. And that kind of makes sense, because if you're looking at it from an algorithm perspective and you're looking at all of pop music, pop R&B, any kind of crossover like this, you're going to have more vocal-centric stuff, generally speaking, and that's what LANDR is responding to. However, in the case of this record, I actually feel like the drive coming from the lows is a little bit more important. I think that the quality of the bass, especially those like harmonic qualities that give it that sort of like, you know, Bootsy Collins synthesizer bass type of thing going on, I feel like that's where I want more of the energy living. So this is where we get into the kind of philosophy of, well, how automated are we, and what are we really doing if we're shifting away from the idea of taking something out of our hands and doing the work for us. I think realistically speaking, you know, there's a lot of automated mastering services out there, and I think over the last 10 years, LANDR really being the first that really pioneered the field, but there's been many since, I think they've all kind of realized that you can't really be completely hands-off and get the desired results that you want, that there has to be some degree of intervention, and I think that having those options is generally a good thing. I'm not mad at just where the defaults have shown up, but I do think that there are some things that can improve. First of all, I think the biggest difference is that I would want to shift over to this warm mode, and I'm going to take off all of my little modifications here before getting into the rest of it. But just going into warm mode is probably going to fix where the actual record is leaning, and it sounds like this.
To follow your road and you see it is a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, think I've been bit. I'm stuck under your collie grip. I'm on fire.
So as a tone curve, I like that better. I will say that the record does feel a little bit smaller this way, but I think that it is also a little bit more musical this way. Now, a little bit of that congestion stuff starts to come back here, and I think that we can modify that a little bit. So another place I'm going to be a little critical here of the automated mastering is this dynamic section. I think that this dynamic section is just not programmed to the best defaults. I think that it's cool that they have a compression in front of their limiting stage, because it reduces the amount of distortion that shows up, and also it can create a sense of fullness and thickness. But in my opinion, it's a little too heavy-handed. So I tend to find myself doing this, where I'm leaning more toward the smooth mode, whatever that means exactly. Or what is it? So yeah, turning to the left increases punch, turning to the right makes the compression smoother. So I just find that whatever this is an improvement over the default sound most of the time, or at least for my mixes. And then also I just don't want to hear so much of the compression. So I tend to be typically turning it down from anywhere between about 2.5 to maybe even 0. So in this case, I'm going to go to 2, and I think that that's going to open things up and get rid of some of that congestive effect while still keeping the frequency turned more toward the warm side of things.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go.
So quick A-B, here's with it in default.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I
feels a little stuffy. Let's open it up.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go.
Breathes a little bit better. Now from there, I still think that there are little tweaks that could be made. I think that the highs could come up ever so slightly. I want to hear that presence in the hi-hat kind of drive the backbeat a little bit more. Well, not the backbeat, the inside groove a little bit more. And then I think as a response to the highs coming up, I'm probably going to want to pull the presence down, but let's just hear it with the highs up.
To follow your word and see it in a memory.
And now we're getting a little bit of that pinch again. The pinch is living a little higher now. It's more like 4K, 5K, as opposed to 3K, 4K. But I do think that taking this presence down ever so slightly is going to smooth things out.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, they got it big. I'm stuck under your.
I think that's pretty good. I think we can also push the vocal a little bit forward, kind of like how it was in the balanced version, but we can do it from a lower corner by just sort of pushing the mids up ever so slightly.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go.
Yeah, and now the vocal comes forward, but it comes forward in a warmer way. So if we jump back over to the balanced version.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to.
It's not bad, but it feels a little thin. We could probably work with this too, actually, by kind of opening up the compression a little bit and maybe pushing the lows and mids, something like that.
To follow your word and see it in a memories.
It's actually pretty good, but here's where we were with the warm mode.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go.
Huh. Might like the balanced one better now.
To follow your word and see it in a memories, but
I don't know, I kind of like both of them now, actually. They're both doing something very similar, but they're doing it slightly differently. Either way, by having these finer controls, I feel like I've now improved upon a really good starting place for a master, but now just kind of bringing it home by having the actual individual parameters that I can control if I need to. Now jumping back over to the version where it's just me stuffing my mix through a limiter.
to follow your word and see it in a memories, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, they got it big. I'm stuck under your coffee grill. I'm on fire. I try to beg, but you won't let.
I think it's pretty apparent that the LANDR version is beating my version just stuffed through a limiter, which is what I'm in my mind saying as good. It's better than where I got it on my own. So I'm going to try it one more time here with the warm setting A being, because I feel like I'm still going to prefer the warm setting a little bit.
To follow your road and you see it in I'm average, but I can't seem to let go. Oh, think I've been bit. I'm stuck under your colleague grill. I'm on fire. I try to beg, but you won't.
Yeah, it's a little bit closer to my mix just stuffed through a limiter, but it feels like it's capturing the same feel, but evening things out and smoothing things out, and also providing that little bit of extra low. So I do think I prefer the warm with the tweaks overall. Now, the other thing is that I would probably push this a little bit further based on what the client wants. This is loud enough for my own taste, and mind you, everything here is actually 5 dB louder than what you're hearing because I have trims on the back end making sure I don't overload anything. In my mind, this is loud enough. Chances are a client is going to want something a little bit louder. It's just the culture of today's music, unfortunately, but it would still hold up. Now, that said, all of that said, let's say that I wanted to look at this through a different perspective. Let's say I have a lot of really high-end gear at my disposal, like a couple of outboard Pultecs or, Avalon 2055, or, maybe some like really, really good stuff like the Soundtech EQs or whatever. If I had those things to my own disposal, I could use this as a basis of opening up my own perspective to be like, oh, okay, this is probably what it really should sound like. Let me just do that with, $40,000 worth of equipment or whatever it would be. And to that note, I think that if I were to send this mix to a really, really good mastering engineer, and fortunately I'm blessed to work with a lot of really good mastering engineers, I think that they would do something that's fairly similar to what I'm getting from the LANDR mastering here. I think that they would just execute it with a little bit more precision and using, very, very high-end gear that sounds unbelievably good. And so we would get pretty much a better version of what LANDR is giving us, because I think LANDR has more or less given us the right idea, and then with a few tweaks, we brought it to where it needs to be. So that's my take on LANDR automated mastering. I think that if we look at it through the context of I'm a self-producing artist who's mixing my own stuff, mastering my own stuff, I think that it's really great that people can have this at their disposal, because it's going to allow them to provide a better result than what they would get on their own. I think if we're comparing it to high-end, top-tier mastering engineers who have done countless hit records and have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested into their monitoring and their gear, then I think that it's going to fall short of that, and I think that's just generally true of automated mastering in general. Just the reality of it. So that's my take on it, and you can agree, you can disagree. I'm sure there will be plenty of both in the comment section below, but drop it on in there. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.